very warm welcome to Insight. I am Amandra Bhatt. Today we talk about the situation in Afghanistan as Taliban attacked key buildings close to the presidential palace in Afghanistan and the CIA headquarters in Kabul. Today we discuss the implications of Tuesday's attack on the peace talks as well as the overall security situation in Afghanistan. And to discuss the same, we have with us in our studios three distinguished guests. Please welcome Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Vice Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to Insight, Dr. Chaulia. Sitting next to him is Qamar Agha, a noted expert on the region. Welcome to Insight, Mr. Agha. And we are also joined by Dr. Rashmi Singh, Chairperson, World Organization of Students and Youth. Welcome to Insight. Professor Chaulia, how do you look at the situation in Afghanistan? On the one hand, we hear of peace talks. On the other, there are repeated attacks in Kabul.
Yeah, it's a dual-faced strategy that the Americans also are fighting on one hand. It's not that they have in any way slowed down their operations. They continue to do their counterterrorism missions supporting the Afghan military. And so if you fight and talk, Taliban says we will also fight and talk. So it's about finding pole positions ahead of 2014. So, you can negotiate from strength if you also show your power on the ground, on the street through violence. So that's the strategy of both sides right now. As far as Qatar, it's interesting because the Taliban, if you look at the composition of the Taliban delegation, which is in Qatar, there are mixed signals as to how legitimate and how acceptable they are to the ground level commanders who are actually leading the anti-American and the anti-Afghan state operations. So Muhammad Tayyib Agha is the head of the delegation and he's supposed to be close to Mullah Omar. But then if you look at the voices from the field which have been captured by some media organizations, there are many local commanders who are saying that we will not accept a sellout. So, and there is also some degree of skepticism which is being created about these Taliban who are in Qatar and who have been there for the last 3 to 4 years now. There are more than 20 of them, senior ones. And so the formal office was just opened recently, but they've been there for a while.
Right.
And there is skepticism on the part of the field level commanders that these guys are basically have become too soft and that they may, enjoy civilian life and normality in a, rich Gulf sheikhdom like Qatar, and that they may somehow trade away the advantage the Taliban has on the ground, which is of course most of the southern part and even the eastern part of Afghanistan, they have actual control, physical control out of the main highways. So there is a divergence there. Okay. And perhaps the ploy of having talks from the point of view of Afghan government, which is of course now a little bit gingerly about the whole process, but initially they were on board with this.
Right.
And the US government is to try and create a wedge and try to actually separate some of the so-called moderate. There are some moderate, for example, Agha Jan Motasim. If you follow his career, this guy is within the Quetta Shura, but he's been saying that, he's been attacked by his hardliners within the Quetta Shura because he's been advocating talks for a long time.
Okay.
And he says that political solution, he's supposed to be head of the political relations of Taliban. So he has been pushing for this and he is afraid, and he claims that the majority of the Quetta Shura are actually in favor of a negotiated settlement. So there are all kinds of voices, and as Agha Sahib was saying, the decentralized nature of Taliban means it's very hard to get an agreement where, a small delegation in Qatar, even if, let us say, they reach some kind of settlement in the long run, starting with a ceasefire. We are not even close to a ceasefire right now.
Right.
So step by step, I think the commitment problem remains. Whenever you go to an international negotiation, how are you able to win the confidence of all your loyal commanders on the ground?
Right.
They're not very sure. So I guess they'll have to keep talking and keep fighting, and eventually out of war weariness. Because some of the commanders on the ground are not so moderate, but they're just saying, we're not achieving very much, and even after 2014, the Americans are going to stay. So maybe, it's better to do a power sharing deal. So there are some such voices. So we'll have to see how the contradictions within the Taliban as an organization evolve to make really any kind of final judgment.
Run much beyond Kabul. So that is one real problem. And in fact, the problem started way back in 2006 when it was called the Spring Offensive of the Taliban, and when they hit Kabul, multiple locations.
See, their ultimate goal is to capture power.
Right.
So there are some groups, they believe.
Right. Dr. Chaulia, but if we look at it from the US point of view, they failed to get any concessions from the Taliban. None of their preconditions was met. They did not abandon their alliance with the Al-Qaeda. They do not honor the Afghan constitution. They haven't given up on violence. It's pretty clear. In such a case, what is it that the US can do to actually protect the rights of women and minorities? Because that's what they said in the beginning, that they are going to ensure that their rights are protected.
I think we have to overcome this whole humanitarian imperialism. I mean, this whole neoliberal, the liberal humanitarianism is premised on the idea that Western armies will come and do some good and lift these societies out of their backwardness and protect their minorities and their women, and that we will introduce the liberal project into these conservative badlands. Because that has been the justification right from the start. Because after Taliban quit power 2001, this so-called war on terror has mutated in many ways into a kind of a humanitarian project. And often you will find hardline right-wing senators in the US Congress saying, like John McCain, for example, would say, we need to keep on, going full steam because we have to go and protect their women. The point is the US military has also committed many atrocities during this last 13 years. Let's not forget those. The point is that the militarization of the region, both historically and contemporary, last 10 years, has a lot to do with the American presence there. And it's also true that the nationalism, or the Pashtun nationalism, let's call it, of the Taliban, is driven by the one unifying banner, which is to drive out the infidels and the foreigners. Right? So I think we should not even be expecting the United States to really stump for the women of Afghanistan and do something. I mean, these are all, I see this as just a veneer for the war machine to keep on going. So there are voices in the US establishment who are going to say that we need to stay there. In fact, as you know, both in the Pentagon as well as among the right-wing senator, people are dead opposed to Obama's notion of even a drawdown. There are many who are saying that, we should keep going. This is like the Vietnam War. The hardliners were saying, give us 2 to 3 more years. We would have bombed the place and we would have won the war. It was the civilians who made us lose. So it's the same situation here. Even with Karzai, there is a parallel. Karzai is very, very insecure now because there is a parallel to what the Americans did with South Vietnam. South Vietnam was their ally. And then 1971-72, Nixon administration, Kissinger began talks and began to sideline South Vietnam because he knew that it was anyway a weak and a failed entity. And he knew that the real power was the communists. So the South Vietnamese were very, very upset, thinking that they were going to, and in the end, they were just rolled over. So the Afghan state needs to be preserved. It's not about Karzai as a person. He may have problems and he may be running a kleptocracy and all that, but in the long run, we need to preserve the Afghan state. And it's, so if these talks lead to direct negotiation between Taliban and the Afghan state, it's well and good.
Okay.
And I think that has to happen. But until now, there is a peace council on the part of the Afghan state. There is a shura on the Taliban side. But they're not meeting with each other because Taliban said these are anyway puppets.
Right.
So we need to go from here to legitimacy for the state to be accepted by Taliban.
Of course, we're going to talk about the role of the Afghan government here as well and implications for India and the entire region. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Professor Chaulia, I'll continue with you. The role of the Karzai government there. We understand that when the decision to open direct talks with the Taliban was announced, he was furious, and he was furious with the office, the Taliban flag and the sign saying Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan, and the Taliban trying to project themselves basically as a government in exile. Now, what is the role that you foresee for Mr. Karzai? Because at the moment it seems the US has all plans to desert him probably and hand over Afghanistan to the Taliban.
I think he is facing a rump presidency. He's got 9 more months or so before the elections in April. So one thing the Americans know is that he's certainly not going to be a long-term player. The drawdown is after the elections. So he will not be around at the time when the big pieces are moved on the chessboard. So to that extent, I think they can afford. But see, what in the process is happening is that an already frail and incomplete state structure is being weakened further through this kind of backdoor actions of the Americans. But at the same time, remember, Karzai himself has tried to play the card of befriending the Taliban from time to time. And he said, they are my brothers, we are opposed against the same external enemy. And he has infuriated the Americans also. Because, he's a survivor. He's been president almost 12 years now. So that's a long time, and he is like a chameleon with many shades. he's tried to, stay at the summit, benefit his, kinsfolk, and create a kind of a regime that is based, that's highly, immoral and very corrupt. But at the same time, I think we have to think about the state. I like John Kerry's comment when he was here recently saying India must play a central role in the upcoming elections in Afghanistan. We have to try and see if we have a fairer outcome this time so that it can create legitimacy in Kabul and that it emanates all the way into the provinces. Right now it's not there, and the Afghan state can cry a horse saying that we are being left out and this is unfair. The point is that they have not deserved the kind of recognition through their own actions or omissions of acts of omission or commission. So what then we need to do is we have to clean up the stables, and this cannot be an external thing. That's where we have to strengthen Afghan communities, Afghan election watch bodies. We have to create mobilize the students. We have to create this whole segment within the society that can stand up and ask for a more accountable government. Once we get that, what is Taliban? I mean, think about it. Taliban is based number one grievance is throw out the foreigners. Okay, the foreigners are going right next year mostly. Very few are going to be left behind. 2, this is a puppet state. This is an illegitimate state. It's not an Islamic state. So once you have a more legitimate framework for the state, I think these peace talks actually Taliban will be forced to negotiate with the legitimate Afghan state, and they'll have to come to the table and eventually come down from their maximalist demands.
Mr. Agha?
Yeah, I fully support him. There are 2-3 things. One is
Dr. Chaulia, what could be the implications for India, because any direct talks with the insurgents could further embolden jihadist elements? Yeah,
I think our embassy in Qatar should be on the ball and watching it closely. Our agencies should be tracking what's going on in these behind-the-door negotiations carefully, because we need our own information. We cannot just depend on what the Americans are telling us as to what's going on. And there is, at the end of the day, I've been saying that India is not a card that can be traded in these kind of negotiations in Qatar. The investments we've already made, as well as both material and in blood, is so tremendous, and the impact of our settlement on us is just extraordinary. So therefore, I think we will need to have our own sources monitoring this very carefully, and to formulate our policy based on the goings on behind the scenes. That's one. 2, I think we will need to step up, because to an extent we have done some free riding on the American effort with the Afghan security forces. And as you know, for many years we've been debating how we can further strengthen the police and the military in Afghanistan. I think our training efforts will need to be ramped up. Of course, we will never, I don't think, ever have boots on the ground. But short of that, we will need to do many other things. Karzai had recently asked for hardware as well. So these are things I think we will have to make an investment, because if we just ride on the coattails of other major powers, what is India's so-called great power ambitions supposed to be? Because great power is supposed to mold its neighborhood as per its own interests, right? And unless we are able to do that, we are falling short if we are just saying, we'll ride piggyback on what the other big players are going to do in Afghanistan. Second thing, I think, with Nawaz Sharif in power, of course, the Afghan policy and Kashmir policy have always been in the hands of the military and the ISI. But at the same time, Nawaz Sharif has some influence on the Tehreek-e-Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, who are not at the talks right now. It's only Haqqani group which is part of the Afghan Taliban more, not so much the Pakistani Taliban. So the Masouds and these kind of groups, Pakistani government has more control over them than current one, the Sharif setup. So I think at the end of the day, in a way you have to look at it as a dual puzzle. You cannot have a solution to Kashmir problem if the Afghan problem is festering, and vice versa. Right. Because the fighters, they move across Pakistani territory, east and west, and they fight on both sides. Especially Lashkar-e-Taiba, huge presence in Afghanistan. So this is how we will need to, if Nawaz Sharif succeeds, let's say, in next couple of years, to create the conducive environment and to push for a final settlement with us, I think we will have to also, find ways for him to settle on the western side. But it's a big question because of the power of the security establishment and the entrance, the vested interests in Pakistan. But I think India will need to ask when we talk to Nawaz Sharif people. Is relatively more moderate than all the other forces in Pakistan. We'll say, okay, we will do if we have to do settlement in Kashmir, let's also talk about Afghanistan. We must have a dialogue with Pakistan. There is no going around it. We can counterbalance them to an extent. We can try and negate them, neutralize them. But the point is, we must also have a dialogue with them on how to deal with the Afghan situation. In the past, there have been mixed signals. They have been trying to push us out of Afghanistan. But the point is, I think Nawaz Sharif is a more sensible person. If we talk business and talk about TAPI and IPI and all these things, and which some of these which involve Afghanistan transit, I think we can, hopefully. I mean, this is all long-term planning, it's not going to come about overnight.
Right.
But if we don't have that vision for a broad regional peace which combines Kashmir and Afghanistan, I think we are doomed.